Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was raised in Gotham as Bruce Wayne's lost protege. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Bloodhaven was a different beast from the rain in Gotham. In Gotham, the rain was a judgment. It fell in thick, greasy sheets, washing the filth of the streets into gutters already choked with sin. It was a cold, constant companion to the city's misery, a baptism that never cleansed. Izuku knew that rain. It was the percussion to his childhood, the sound he associated with the whisper of a cape and the promise of a long night. Here, in Bloodhaven, the rain was just miserable. It was a thin, whining drizzle that clung to everything, making the neon signs bleed into blurry puddles on the cracked asphalt. It had no gravitas, no soul. It was just wet. A flicker of movement in the alley below drew his attention. Izuku Midoriya, known to the few who knew him at all in this city as Deku, shifted his weight on the gargoyle's stony head. The moniker was a private, bitter joke, a name he'd once dreamed of turning into a symbol of hope, now used as a phantom's alias in a city that had forgotten the meaning of the word. He was perched 5 stories up, a ghost in a city of ghosts. His gear was a patchwork of Wayne-Tech prototypes he'd smuggled out, and his own modifications. The body armor was a sleek, dark green composite, scarred from 100 near misses. The cowl was a streamlined thing of black polymer, its lenses glowing a faint, analytical white. He was smaller than his mentor, leaner, built for acrobatics and speed, not brute force. A scalpel to Batman's warhammer. Below, 3 men were cornering a 4th. The classic Bloodhaven shakedown. The assailants were part of the blockbuster crew, identifiable by the crude steroid injectors holstered on their thighs. They were clumsy, over-muscled, and predictable. His internal analysis was already running, a constant stream of data that was as natural to him as breathing. Target 1, leader. Overconfident. Stands with weight on his back foot, leaving his front leg open for a sweep. Carries a rusted pipe. Slow swing radius. Target 2, right flank. Twitchy. Eyes darting to the alley entrance. The weak link. Probably on a new batch of the juice, paranoia is a common side effect. Target 3, left flank. The biggest. A walking slab of muscle. Relies entirely on strength. Low center of gravity, but slow to pivot. The victim was a dockworker, judging by his worn jacket and the smell of fish that carried even up here. He was trying to be brave, hands held up in a placating gesture. It wouldn't work. These men weren't here for his wallet. They were here to make a point. Izuku didn't want to do this. Every time he dropped into an alley, every time he threw a punch, the ghosts whispered. But letting it happen was worse. Inaction was the sin he could no longer bear. He pushed off the gargoyle, his grapnel line firing with a nearly silent hiss. He didn't swing in a wide, dramatic arc. That was for show. His was a controlled, tactical descent, using the shadows of fire escapes to break his silhouette. He landed on the damp concrete with less sound than a falling raindrop, a skill drilled into him over 1,000 nights on the rooftops of Gotham. Leave him alone. Izuku's voice was flat, run through a modulator in his cowl that made it sound cold and synthetic. Dehumanized. The 3 thugs spun around. Target 1 scoffed. Look what we got here. Some kind of bat wannabe. You're in the wrong city, freak. Izuku didn't reply. He let the silence hang, let their drug-addled minds fill it with fear. This, too, was a lesson from Bruce. Fear was a tool. An effective one. Target 1 charged, swinging the pipe. It was exactly as Izuku predicted. He dropped low, his body moving in a fluid, boneless motion. He swept the man's leg, and as the thug went down, Izuku's elbow connected with the back of his knee, eliciting a wet pop and a scream of pain. 1 down. Target 2 pulled a knife, his hand trembling. Izuku's mind flashed with an image, a wider, more manic grin, a different kind of blade. He shoved it down. Focus. Analyze. Act. He feinted left, and when the thug lunged, Izuku used his momentum against him, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting. The knife clattered to the ground. A precise chop to the side of the neck, and the man crumpled. 2 down. The big one, target 3, roared and charged like a bull. This was the real danger. Izuku couldn't match him in strength. He wouldn't try. He dodged the first clumsy haymaker, and used the brick wall as a springboard, launching himself up and over the man's shoulder. As he flew past, he slapped a small, circular device onto the back of the thug's neck. The man stumbled, turning to find him. Izuku was already 10 feet away, a small trigger in his hand. I wouldn't move too fast. His modulated voice echoed. That's a high-frequency electroshock device, enough non-lethal voltage to shut down your central nervous system for an hour. Your choice. The giant froze, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and primal fear. He slowly raised his hands. Izuku glanced at the dockworker, who was staring, breathless. Go. Now. The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out of the alley and disappeared into the night. Izuku backed away into the shadows, his grapnel line already aimed at the rooftops. He was about to fire when the down leader groaned, propping himself up on one elbow. You think you're a hero? The man spat, blood dripping from his lips. You're just another freak in a mask, waiting to fail. The word hit Izuku like a physical blow. Fail. The rain-slicked alley twisted, the neon lights blurring into a cacophony of red and green. The smell of wet garbage was replaced by the cloying scent of cheap perfume and expensive champagne. The sounds of Bloodhaven faded, replaced by the polite murmur of a gala, the clinking of glasses, and then, a single, high-pitched laugh that cut through it all like a shard of glass. Flashback 3 years ago. The Gotham City Charity Gala was Bruce Wayne's natural habitat. A 12-year-old Izuku Midoriya, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket, hated every second of it. He stood by Bruce's side, a silent, observant shadow. To the glittering high society of Gotham, he was Bruce's latest philanthropic project, the quiet, orphaned boy from Japan. They didn't see the mind behind his eyes, a mind that had already catalogued every exit, every security camera, and the subtle bulge of a concealed weapon under the jacket of at least 3 guests. Stay close, Echo, Bruce murmured, his voice a low rumble that was lost in the din. On the surface, he was the affable billionaire playboy, a smile fixed on his face. But Izuku could see the tension in his jaw, the constant scan of his eyes. They weren't here for the canapes. Tonight's mission was simple reconnaissance. A weapons deal was rumored to be going down between a visiting Yakuza Oyabun and a Moroni family lieutenant. Izuku's job was to observe, identify the players, and use the micro-camera in his bowtie to record the exchange. Batman would handle the takedown later. He was good at this part. The analysis. The observation. He felt a swell of pride as he subtly pointed out the Yakuza contact to Bruce, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide the faint shimmer of a full-body Irizumi tattoo at his collar. Bruce gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was all the validation Izuku needed. That was when the laughter started. It wasn't broadcast over a speaker. It came from the main stage, where the mayor had been giving a speech. The lights flickered and died, plunging the ballroom into chaos, replaced a moment later by sickening green and purple spotlights. And there he was, standing center stage with his rictus grin and wild, emerald hair. The Joker. Panic erupted. Screams echoed off the marble walls. Bruce's hand clamped down on Izuku's shoulder, a silent command, do not move. Good evening, Gotham's finest! Joker cackled, his voice a horrifying symphony of glee and madness. I do hope I'm not interrupting. I just came to make a withdrawal from your lives. His goons, dressed in grotesque clown masks, swarmed the room, brandishing weapons. Bruce was already moving, pulling Izuku behind a large marble pillar, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Izuku, stay here, Bruce commanded, his voice dropping into the Batman growl. Do not engage. That's an order. But the Joker was chaos incarnate. Before Bruce could slip away, a spotlight found them. Brucey! Leaving so soon? And with your little ward? How sweet! The plan was shattered. They were exposed. Joker's eyes, 2 chips of obsidian in a sea of white makeup, landed on Izuku. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. Well now, he purred, striding towards them. What have we here? A little birdie, trying to learn how to fly? Bruce stepped in front of Izuku, a human shield. Joker. It's over. Oh, Brucey, it's never over. Joker sang. He snapped his fingers. Two of his thugs grabbed Commissioner Gordon, who had been near the stage, and dragged him forward, shoving him to his knees. Simultaneously, another group herded a terrified family, a mother, a father, and a little girl clutching a teddy bear, into the center of the room. Joker produced two old-fashioned, comically large detonators, one in each hand. Wires snaked from them, one leading to a vest strapped to Gordon, the other to a garishly wrapped gift box placed at the family's feet. Let's play a game, little bird, Joker said, his attention fixed solely on Izuku. He completely ignored Bruce, which was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. Your daddy bats here is too boring. He just tried to save everyone, and where's the fun in that? But you have potential. So, you get to choose. He held up the detonators. In my left hand, a little surprise for Gotham's top cop. In my right, a party favor for this lovely little family. You can only stop one. Tell me which one to disarm. A or B? Tick-tock, little bird. The punchline is coming. Izuku's mind, his greatest asset, became his prison. It raced, processing every variable, every possibility. It was a classic trolley problem, a no-win scenario designed for maximum psychological damage. He had been trained for this. Bruce had run him through hundreds of simulations. Simulation 14B, prioritize officials to maintain civic order. Save Gordon. Simulation 27C, prioritize civilians, the core of the mission. Save the family. But this wasn't a simulation. The little girl was crying. Gordon was staring at him, his face grim but resolute. Joker's eyes were dancing with insane delight. There had to be a third option. There was always a third option. If he could create a diversion, Bruce could move on Joker. A fire alarm? No, the exits were blocked. A sonic emitter? He didn't have his full gear. He just needed to stall, to calculate. He saw it. A fire extinguisher on the far wall. A ricochet shot with a borrowed piece of silverware could trigger it. It was a 1 in a million shot, but his analysis said it was possible. It would create a cloud, a distraction. Bo ring! Joker shrieked, his smile vanishing. You're thinking too much. That's the problem with you bats. No spontaneity. Izuku's hesitation, that single, fatal second of calculation, was all the opening Joker needed. He hadn't been waiting for an answer. He'd been waiting for the perfect moment of despair. He slammed his hands together. The detonator wired to Commissioner Gordon fizzled, and a shower of confetti shot out. A gag. The gift box at the family's feet did not shoot out confetti. The explosion was deafening. It wasn't a massive blast, but it was brutally effective. It threw the family backward. The sound of the mother and father screaming as they instinctively shielded their daughter was a sound that would be seared into Izuku's memory forever. Then, there was only the ringing in his ears and the Joker's laughter, a high, unhinged sound that filled the sudden, horrified silence. Whoopsie! Joker giggled. See, Birdie? In my world, there are no right answers. You tried to be the hero, and you just made more orphans. Remind you of anyone? Maybe your mommy and daddy? That broke him. The world tilted on its axis. The sight of the bleeding, broken family, the little girl's dropped teddy bear lying in a spreading pool of crimson, the Joker's words digging into the deepest wound he had, it was too much. Then, a blur of black. Batman, a force of pure, distilled fury, was on the Joker. The sounds of sickening, wet impacts echoed through the ballroom. But it was too late. The damage was done. The screaming had started again, from guests, from the injured family, from the little girl. Izuku stood frozen, a statue of failure. He saw Bruce glance back at him for a fraction of a second over his shoulder, as he brutalized the Joker. There was no comfort in that gaze. There was no reassurance. There was only a cold, hard fury that Izuku's terrified, guilt-ridden mind interpreted as pure, undiluted disappointment. He had been given a test, and he had failed. He had hesitated. He had broken the mission, and he had broken those people. He was a liability. Present day, the ghost of the Joker's laughter faded, replaced by the whine of a distant Bloodhaven police siren. Izuku was back in the alley, his knuckles white where he gripped the trigger for the shock device. The thug was still frozen, sweating. "Get out of here!" Izuku's voice was a harsh rasp, the modulator failing to hide the tremor. "Tell your boss this alley is off limits." He didn't wait for an answer. He fired his grapnel line and ascended into the weeping sky, leaving the dregs of Bloodhaven behind. His apartment was a small, sterile box in a decaying tenement building. The rent was paid in cash from his freelance work, slicing into corporate servers for disillusioned employees, providing untraceable information to the few journalists in the city who still had a spine. It was a lonely, Spartan existence. A single mattress lay on the floor in one corner. The rest of the space was dominated by a bank of computer monitors, servers humming quietly, and a workbench littered with half-finished gadgets and soldering tools. On a large corkboard that covered one wall, a complex web of connections was mapped out. It wasn't a hero's investigation board. It was a criminal network analysis of Bloodhaven, from the street-level scum to the corrupt city officials who pulled the strings. It was a pale imitation of the Batcomputer's vast database, a shadow of the work he used to do. He pulled off his cowl, the cool, recycled air of the apartment a relief on his sweat-slicked skin. He ran a hand through his unruly mop of green hair, his breathing still ragged. He caught his reflection in one of the dark monitor screens. The boy staring back at him was 15, but his green eyes held the weary weight of someone much older. Faint scars traced his jawline, and a more prominent one cut through his right eyebrow, mementos from his new life. He sat down at his terminal, forcing himself to work, to drown the memories in data. But they wouldn't stay down tonight. The thug's word, fail, had unlocked the box he kept sealed tight in the back of his mind. He remembered the return to the Batcave that night. The chilling silence. Alfred had tried to tend to the scrapes on his face, his old hands gentle, his eyes full of a pity that felt like an accusation. Bruce hadn't said a word. He just stood before the Batcomputer, his back to Izuku, the broad, caped shoulders a wall of impenetrable disappointment. Izuku had stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the lecture, for the punishment, for the declaration that he was being sent back to the orphanage. But the silence was worse. The silence was a void where a father's guidance should have been. Izuku had interpreted it as condemnation. "He's seen what I am," he thought, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. A mistake. A burden. A failure who gets people hurt. That night, he had packed a single bag. He'd taken some spare cash, a few prototype gadgets he knew wouldn't be missed, and one of his analysis notebooks. He'd made his bed perfectly, a habit Alfred had instilled in him. On the pillow, he left a short, tear-stained note. "I'm sorry. I'm not a hero. I'm a liability." He'd slipped out of Wayne Manor and into the pre-dawn light, disappearing into the system he had been trained to navigate from the outside. He had never looked back. For 3 years he had survived. He had used the skills Bruce had beaten into him to stay off the grid, to build a new identity, to become a ghost. He funneled his obsessive analytical nature not into heroics, but into survival. His notebooks, once filled with hopeful drawings of heroes and detailed analyses of their quirks, were now filled with the grim realities of Gotham's criminal underworld, their weaknesses, their patterns, their fears. Gotham Criminal Profiling Tactical Weaknesses, Volume 14. A proximity alert chimed on his monitor, pulling him from the past. A motion sensor on his fire escape. He killed the lights, his body instantly tensing. He grabbed a modified Eskrima stick from his workbench, its tip crackling with a low electric charge. He melted into the shadows beside the window, his heart hammering a steady, controlled rhythm. It was probably nothing. A stray cat. A junkie looking for a place to shoot up. The window slid open with a soft, practiced scrape. A figure slipped inside, moving with a grace and silence that set every one of Izuku's finely honed alarms screaming. This was no junkie. This was a professional. Izuku lunged from the darkness, the Eskrima stick swinging in a tight, disabling arc aimed at the intruder's wrist. The figure moved with impossible speed, not just deflecting the blow but redirecting it, flowing around Izuku's attack like smoke. A hand caught his wrist, the grip firm but not crushing, using his own momentum to spin him around and pin him against the wall. It wasn't a brutal slam. It was a movement of perfect, breathtaking efficiency. Izuku froze. He knew that technique. He knew that precise, disarming flow of energy. Only one man had ever been able to move like that against him. You've gotten faster, Izuku. A familiar voice, smooth as silk and sharp as a razor's edge, spoke from the darkness behind him. But your form is sloppy. You're leading with your aggression. The lights flickered back on. Standing before him, dressed in a discreet, dark gray suit that did little to hide his wiry strength, was Dick Grayson. Nightwing. The first Robin. The only one Izuku had ever considered a brother. Dick? Izuku breathed, the tension draining out of him, replaced by a flood of complicated emotions. Dick let him go, a wry, sad smile on his face. In the flesh. You're a hard person to find, little brother. That was the point, Izuku said, his voice raw. He backed away, putting the workbench between them. What are you doing here? How did you find me? It took me 3 years, Dick admitted, his eyes scanning the Spartan apartment, a flicker of pain in his expression. Bruce has respected your wishes. He's kept his distance. He ordered me to do the same, so you're disobeying a direct order from Batman? You've got a death wish. I'm not here as Robin or Nightwing. I'm here as your brother, Dick said, his voice softening. And besides, the circumstances have changed. He's the one who sent the car. Izuku's blood ran cold. He hadn't noticed the black, ridiculously expensive sedan parked across the street. It was shielded from all forms of electronic surveillance, of course. Untraceable. Invisible to anyone not looking for it. I'm not going back, Izuku stated, his voice hard. We're not asking you to move back into your old room, Dick said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. This isn't about that. This is bigger. Something's happening, Izuku. Something global. Bruce. He needs his best analyst. Izuku let out a harsh, bitter laugh. His best analyst ran away 3 years ago because he got a family blown up. He has others. He has Oracle now, doesn't he? It's not the same, and you know it, Dick countered, stepping closer. Barbara is a genius, the best there is. But you see things differently. You were raised in the cave. You think like him, and this problem, it has roots in a place none of us understand. He paused, letting the weight of his next word settle. Japan, Japan. The word was a key, unlocking a door to a part of his life he had buried even deeper than the Joker incident. The faint, fragmented memories of his parents. The smell of his mother's katsudan. The sound of his father's gentle laughter. The fire. The screaming. The man in the sharp suit who had pulled him from the wreckage, who had offered him a new life, a new purpose. Bruce, he shook his head, trying to clear the fog. No. I'm done. My life in Japan ended the same day my life in Gotham did. I'm not that person anymore. Are you sure? Dick asked, his gaze unwavering. Or is this, all of this? He gestured around the bleak apartment. Just a prison you've built for yourself? A way to punish yourself for one mistake? It wasn't a mistake, Izuku whispered, the words tearing from his throat. It was a choice. I hesitated. I failed. You were 12, Izuku. You were a child facing down a monster. Bruce never blamed you. He blamed himself. For putting you in that position. For not being there fast enough. Your running away didn't prove you were a liability. It just broke his heart all over again. Izuku stared at him, the foundation of his self-imposed exile beginning to crack. For 3 years he had been sustained by the certainty of his failure and Bruce's disappointment. To hear that Bruce had blamed himself, it was a thought too painful, too complicated to process. Dick sighed, seeing the conflict in his eyes. Look, I can't make you come back. But he needs your help. We all do. He placed the small, encrypted burner phone on the workbench. Alfred wanted to give you this, said you know what to do with it. Izuku looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't touch it. Be well, Izuku, Dick said softly. He moved to the window, then paused, his back to him. For what it's worth. I miss you. And then he was gone, disappearing into the Bloodhaven night as silently as he had arrived. Izuku stood alone in his apartment, the silence suddenly deafening. The hum of his servers, the drip of a leaky faucet, the distant sirens, it all faded into the background. His entire world had been tilted off its axis. His eyes were drawn to the burner phone. A simple, black, untraceable piece of plastic and circuits. But he knew what it represented. It was a bridge back to a life he had forsaken, to a family he had abandoned, to a man he had both loved and feared as a father. He stared at it for a long, long time. The ghosts were whispering again, but for the first time in years, they weren't all screaming about his failure. Some were whispering about duty, about family, about a promise he'd made in a burned-out building in Muzurifu, a promise to a dying man and woman that he would live. His hand trembled as he reached out and picked up the phone. It felt impossibly heavy. He flipped it open. The screen was dark. He knew it was keyed to his biometrics. He pressed his thumb against the small scanner. The screen lit up, and a single, complex decryption key began to scroll. It was a cipher of their own design, something he and Bruce had created together on a long night in the cave, based on the star charts of their respective birthdates. Unbreakable, untraceable, and personal, the decryption finished. A single line of text appeared on the screen, the font crisp and formal, yet imbued with a warmth that cut through 3 years of cold and loneliness. It wasn't from Bruce. It was from the one person whose judgment he had always trusted, the one person whose disapproval would have been the final nail in his coffin. It was from Alfred, Master Izuku. He needs you. Gotham needs you. We have a problem that extends far beyond the city limits. Izuku sank into his chair, the phone clutched in his hand. The rain continued to fall outside his window, a miserable, whining Bloodhaven drizzle. But in his mind, he could hear the sound of a different rain, a Gotham rain. The ghost of Crime Alley had found him. And it was calling him home. The encrypted text on the burner phone was a summons, a ghost rattling its chains. For a long moment, Izuku Midoriya did nothing. He sat in the oppressive silence of his Bloodhaven apartment, the glow from his monitors painting his face in cold blue light. The world he had so meticulously built for himself, a world of shadows, data, and self-imposed exile, was being breached by a single, polite request from a man who had once tucked him into bed. He needs you. The words were a perfect weapon, crafted by Alfred with surgical precision to bypass all of Izuku's defenses. It wasn't a command from Batman, which he could have rejected out of pride or resentment. It wasn't a plea from Bruce, which his guilt would have twisted into an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact from the one person who had never lied to him. With a deep, shuddering breath, Izuku began the process of erasure. It was a protocol he had designed himself, a digital scorched earth policy. He initiated a series of cascading wipe and rewrite algorithms on his servers, turning 3 years of data, criminal profiles, corporate backdoors, his entire digital footprint as the information broker, Deku, into a meaningless stream of binary noise. He dismantled his custom-built computer rig, salvaging only a few key components. The rest he submerged in a bath of thermite, ready for incineration. His notebooks, the new, grim volumes of his analysis, he fed one by one into a small, high-temperature furnace in the corner, watching the pages curl and blacken into ash. He was erasing the ghost of Bloodhaven, just as he had once tried to erase the boy from Gotham. 2 hours later, his apartment was a hollow shell. All that remained was his gear, a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, and the burner phone. He put on his vigilante armor, the dark green composite plates feeling like a second skin. It was anonymous, functional, and devoid of any symbol. It was the armor of a ghost. He slipped the call over his head, the world resolving into the crisp, tactical display of his HUD. He sent a one-word reply on the burner phone, ETA. The response came back instantly. Acknowledged. Vehicle dispatched. Sub-level 4, Bloodhaven Transit Hub. Godspeed, Master Izuku. He didn't take the fire escape. He went to the roof and leaped across the gap to the next building, his movements fluid and silent. He moved across the city's skyline, a dark shape against the perpetually overcast sky. He was leaving Bloodhaven. He was going back to the one place he had sworn he would never return to. He was going back to the heart of the beast. He was going home. The journey from Bloodhaven to Gotham was a descent. Not in distance, but in atmosphere. The sleazy, desperate misery of Bloodhaven gave way to something older, colder, and more profound. As the unmarked, armored car, a civilian model Wayne Enterprises vehicle with more armor plating than a tank, ate up the miles, the very architecture began to change. The buildings grew taller, more ornate, their Gothic spires clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The gargoyles that watched from every cornice were not decorations. They were sentinels, silent judges in a city-wide asylum. Izuku stared out the bulletproof window, his cowl resting in his lap. He felt the old weight settling on his shoulders, the familiar pressure of Gotham's oppressive gloom. This was a city that demanded vigilance. A city that bred monsters in its shadows. A city that had made him, and then broken him. The car didn't head for Wayne Manor. He knew it wouldn't. That would be too personal, too much like a homecoming. Instead, it descended into the labyrinthine underground road network that ran beneath the city, a secret artery known only to a select few. It finally came to a stop in a sterile, concrete parking garage, a Wayne Enterprises RD substation. A neutral ground. The driver's partition slid down. Alfred Pennyworth sat in the front seat, his reflection visible in the rearview mirror. He hadn't been driving, of course, but he was there. He always was. His kind, tired eyes met Izuku's in the mirror. "It is good to see you, my boy," Alfred said, his voice a balm on 3 years of raw nerves. "Though I wish the circumstances were more pleasant, Alfred." Izuku's voice was hoarse. I shouldn't have left like that. The past is a closed book, Master Izuku. We need only concern ourselves with the chapter we are writing today," Alfred replied, turning slightly in his seat. "He is waiting for you. Level 10, the secure communications suite." Izuku nodded, grabbing his duffel bag. As he opened the door, Alfred spoke again. "For what it's worth, the house has been dreadfully quiet without the sound of your muttering." A ghost of a smile touched Izuku's lips. It was the first genuine one in years. He stepped out of the car and into a private elevator. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its ascent. The cool, recycled air of the substation couldn't stop the sweat from beading on his forehead. This was it. The reunion. The elevator opened into a room that was a miniature Batcave. A bank of monitors dominated one wall, all displaying lines of code. The room was dark, the only light coming from the screens. And there, standing in the center of it, was a silhouette that had haunted his dreams and fueled his nightmares. A silhouette of immense presence, of absolute authority. Batman. He wasn't wearing the full suit, just the cowl and the upper body armor over a pair of black tactical pants. The symbol of the bat was stark and gray against his chest. He didn't turn as Izuku entered. His attention was fixed on the main screen. "Report." Batman's voice was a low growl, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of the mission. There was no Bruce here. Izuku swallowed, his throat dry. He fell back into the familiar cadence of his old life, the rote professionalism that had been drilled into him. "No followers. Maintained stealth protocols. Erased my Bloodhaven identity completely. I am clean." "Good," Batman said, still not turning. He gestured a gauntlet hand toward the main screen. "The situation has escalated." On the screen, a global map shimmered into view. It was a dark, foreboding image of the world at night. Then, a red dot appeared over Japan. From that dot, thin, cancerous tendrils began to spread, branching out across the globe. They snaked into Europe, Africa, the Americas. Each tendril terminated in a cluster of smaller red dots. 3 years ago, I began tracking a surge in black market technology," Batman's voice narrated, cold and analytical. "Weapons, experimental biotech, illicit quirk enhancement drugs, all of it was untraceable, a ghost in the system. 6 months ago, I found a through line. A single, unifying signature in the text-based code and chemical composition. It all led back to one source." His finger tapped a button on the console. The map zoomed in on the original red dot over Japan. A name appeared in stark, white letters, all for one. "He's a ghost, a myth in the Japanese underworld. Some say he's been operating for over a century. A boogeyman. But he's real." He's been consolidating power on a global scale, absorbing criminal organizations, and distributing his assets. The Yakuza clan from the Gala 3 years ago. They were one of his first international acquisitions. Izuku flinched at the mention of the Gala, but Batman gave no indication he noticed. His network is a hydra. You cut off one head, 2 more take its place. His agents are embedded everywhere. We've identified cells in Metropolis, Central City, and as of 72 hours ago, Gotham. A new series of dots flared up on the map, right over the city they were in. They're trying to absorb the Falcone crime family, offering them access to advanced weaponry that would destabilize the entire city. My usual methods are too direct. We can't just punch this problem. We need intelligence. We need to understand the network from the inside. And the source is in Japan. Finally, he turned. The white lenses of the cowl seemed to bore into Izuku's soul. Your background is an asset we cannot replicate. You understand the culture. You speak the language, and your analytical skills. He paused. Your skills are required. There it was. No emotion. No I missed you. Just a statement of tactical necessity. It was exactly what Izuku had expected, and yet it still stung. He was a tool being brought out of storage for a specific job. What's the mission? Izuku asked, his voice as flat as he could make it. Infiltration and analysis. Batman replied. But the landscape has changed. All for One isn't the only player to have emerged from Japan. He typed another command. The screen changed, displaying a video file. It was shaky, bystander footage. A collapsing building, fire, and smoke. Then, a booming laugh that was the polar opposite of the Joker's. It was a laugh that was full of life, of strength, of unshakable confidence. A massive figure in a red, white, and blue costume burst from the wreckage, holding a bus full of people over his head as if it were a toy. His smile was a beacon. I am here! The figure roared. Izuku stared, his breath catching in his throat. It was him. The #1 hero. The symbol of peace. All Might. The hero he had idolized his entire life. The one whose videos he had watched on loop a million times as a child, both before and after his parents' death. The hero he had written about in his very first notebook. He's the public face of the war against All for One, Batman stated. A symbol. Loud. Destructive. But effective. He has been tracking AFO for years. And his investigation has also led him to Gotham. Before Izuku could process this bombshell, an alert chimed through the comms suite. It was Alfred's voice, calm and professional. Sir, your visitor has arrived. I've shown him to your office at Wayne Tower, as requested. Acknowledged, Batman said. He turned back to Izuku. Stay here. Monitor the feeds. Do not be seen. He strode towards the elevator, the black cape sweeping behind him. The doors slid shut, and Izuku was left alone with the ghost of his childhood hero on the screen and the weight of a world-threatening conspiracy settling around him. Toshinori Yagi felt profoundly out of place in Gotham. Even in his civilian form, a skeletal man who looked as though a strong breeze might snap him in two, he felt the city's oppressive nature. He had walked its streets for a day, and he hadn't heard a single child laugh. The people here didn't walk, they scurried, their heads down, their collars pulled up, as if expecting a blow at any moment. The architecture was a monument to dread. It was a city that had given up on the sun. Now, he stood in the penthouse office of Wayne Tower, a monument of a different kind. It was a sterile, glass and steel cage perched at the top of the city, looking down on the darkness from a position of immense power. It was clean, it was modern, and it was just as soulless as the gargoyle-choked streets below. His investigation into All for One's financial network had led him here, to a shell corporation that was, several layers removed, a subsidiary of Wayne Enterprises. It was a dead end, professionally scrubbed and firewalled. He could have spent months trying to hack his way through it. Instead, he had opted for the direct approach. He had requested a meeting with Bruce Wayne himself. The door opened, and the man walked in. Toshinori had, of course, researched Bruce Wayne. He knew the public persona, the billionaire orphan, the careless playboy, the philanthropist who threw money at the city's problems like a man trying to extinguish a volcano with a garden hose. The man who entered the room looked the part. He was handsome, impeccably dressed, and wore a lazy, charming smile. But his eyes... Toshinori was a man who had looked into the face of true evil, and he knew how to read people. Bruce Wayne's eyes were not lazy. They were ancient, calculating, and held a profound, bottomless sorrow. This was no playboy. This was a soldier. Mr. Yagi, Bruce said, extending a hand. His voice was smooth and practiced. An honor. I'm a great admirer of the work you do. All Might is quite the inspiration. Toshinori took the hand. The grip was firm, powerful. Thank you, Mr. Wayne. And thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I'm here on a matter of some urgency. Please, Bruce said, gesturing to a set of leather chairs. My city is your city. They sat. The chess match began. I am here investigating a criminal element from my home country. Toshinori began, choosing his words carefully. A man who goes by the name All for One. His organization has recently become international. Their reach is insidious. They deal in weapons, human trafficking, and something far worse. They have found a way to steal and transfer quirks. He watched Bruce Wayne for a reaction. There was nothing. Not a flicker of surprise. Just a quiet, intense focus. That sounds troubling, Bruce said, his tone one of polite concern. It is, Toshinori affirmed. My investigation has led me to a shipping company, Interpacific Logistics. They have been moving illicit materials through Gotham's port, and I have discovered that this company is owned by a holding firm, which is in turn owned by a subsidiary of Wayne Enterprises. He let the accusation hang in the air. Bruce didn't flinch. He leaned forward, the playboy mask slipping just a fraction. Mr. Yagi, my company is a multinational behemoth. I have thousands of subsidiaries. It is impossible for me to personally vet every employee and every transaction. However, he steepled his fingers. When I received your request for a meeting, I had my people look into Interpacific Logistics. You are correct. They are dirty. And they are attempting to use the Wayne Enterprises name as a shield. A shield which I intend to revoke. Violently, the word hung in the air. Violently. Not legally or financially. The mask had slipped again. Toshinori decided to push. I appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Wayne. But this is more than a simple corporate malfeasance case. This is about a war being fought in the shadows, a war that requires specialists. Men like me. He held Bruce's gaze. And men like your city's protector. The Batman. Silence. The hum of the city outside the panoramic window was the only sound. Bruce Wayne's charming smile was gone completely now. He was looking at Toshinori not as a foreign dignitary, but as a threat to be analyzed. The Batman is a myth, Mr. Yagi, Bruce said, his voice dangerously smooth. A ghost story criminals tell each other. I have fought villains who could level cities with a thought. Toshinori countered, his own voice dropping, losing its reedy quality and gaining a hint of the power it held in his other form. I have seen things that would make your Gotham boogeymen look like petty thugs. I am not a man who is easily fooled by ghost stories. And I know that I am not the only one fighting this war. I came here to speak to your city's true symbol. I believe he and I have a common enemy. Bruce Wayne stood up. The air in the room crackled with tension. For a moment, Toshinori thought the man might call security. Instead, he walked to his desk and pressed a hidden button. A section of the polished mahogany wall slid away, revealing a private elevator. You are a very perceptive man, Mr. Yagi, Bruce said, his voice now several octaves lower. It was a gravelly, intimidating sound that Toshinori had only heard on grainy, illicit recordings. It was the voice of the Bat. And you are right. We do have a common enemy. But if we are to discuss this further, we cannot do it here. He gestured to the elevator. Come with me. I'll show you my real office. Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, followed Bruce Wayne into the elevator. The doors closed, and they began a descent that seemed to go on forever, deep into the bedrock of Gotham City itself. Back in the substation, Izuku was drowning in data. The feeds Batman had given him access to were a fire hose of information on All for One's network. He absorbed it all, his mind racing, making connections, identifying patterns. It was the most complex puzzle he had ever encountered. This wasn't just a criminal empire. It was a shadow government, meticulously constructed over decades. But a part of his mind was elsewhere. It was fixated on the image of All Might. Seeing him, even on a recording, had reawakened something in him, something he thought had died in that ballroom, the pure, childish desire to be a hero. A feeling of hope. It was a dangerous, painful sensation. A new window popped up on his screen. It was a security feed from a hidden location, labeled simply, Cave. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He clicked on it. The image resolved. He was looking at the heart of it all. The Batcave. It was just as he remembered, and yet different. The giant penny and the robotic T-Rex were still there, monuments to forgotten adventures. The row of memorial cases, however, had a new, empty spot next to the one holding Dick's original Robin suit. A spot that should have been his. The Bat-computer was bigger, more advanced, but the scent of damp stone, ozone, and motor oil, he could almost smell it through the screen. Then, he saw them. Batman, cowl now removed to reveal the grim face of Bruce Wayne, was standing beside the main console, and next to him, looking completely and utterly surreal in the gothic darkness of the cave, was All Might. He wasn't in his skeletal form. He was in his hero form. A giant of a man, radiating an almost physical aura of power and goodness, his signature V-shaped hair antennae nearly scraping the top of the cave. The brightest hero in the world was standing in the darkest place on Earth. Izuku's mind short-circuited. He could only stare, dumbfounded. "Your operation is impressive, Batman." All Might's voice boomed, echoing slightly in the vast cavern. "Though a bit gloomy, it's functional," Bruce replied curtly. He brought up the same world map Izuku had been studying. "This is what we are facing. All for One is not just a man. He is a system, and his final goal is complete control. I have dedicated my life to stopping him," All Might said, his voice losing its boom and taking on a somber, serious tone. "He is the embodiment of evil, preying on the weak, turning hope to despair. He is the antithesis of everything a hero stands for." "We agree on that much," Bruce said. He gestured to the map. "His network in Japan is nearly impenetrable. He is protected by layers of political influence, loyal fanatics, and villains whose quirks make them nearly unbeatable. A frontal assault is impossible. My sources are deaf and blind, as are mine," All Might admitted, a flicker of frustration crossing his smiling face. "He is a ghost. To get close to him, one would need a deep, intrinsic understanding of the Japanese criminal underworld, and the analytical ability to process information that no normal person could." Bruce looked away from the screen, his gaze turning toward a dark, unused corner of the cave. "I have a specialist. Someone with a unique insight into Japanese criminal infrastructure." Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew Bruce was talking about him. He felt a strange mix of pride and dread. All Might looked intrigued. "One of your operatives? Nightwing, perhaps?" "No," Bruce said. His voice was quiet, and for the first time, Izuku heard something other than the cold commander or the brooding vigilante. He heard the faint, almost imperceptible tremor of a father speaking of a lost son. "He is estranged. He was raised here, in this cave. Trained by me. His analytical mind is second to none. He was my protégé." A heavy silence filled the cave. Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe. He was listening to his own eulogy. "What happened to him?" All Might asked gently. Bruce's jaw tightened. "He left. He believed he had failed the mission. He blamed himself. I blamed myself." It was a confession, torn from the deepest part of him. "But the current situation is too critical to let old wounds fester. I've called him back." Just as Bruce finished his sentence, a soft chime echoed through the cave, the sound of the secret elevator platform arriving from the substation. It was the entrance Izuku had always used, the one that connected directly to the network of Wayne R.D. bunkers. The one meant for Echo. Both Bruce and All Might turned toward the sound. The platform rose silently from the floor. And there, standing in his dark, functional armor, his green hair a wild mess and his wide, shocked eyes reflecting the light of the Bat-computer, was Izuku Midoriya. He stared across the expanse of the cave. At Bruce, his mentor, his father figure, whose pained, complicated expression was laid bare for the first time, and at him. The number one hero. The symbol of peace. His childhood idol. All Might. Standing in the Batcave, looking right at him, the world of symbols and the world of shadows had just collided. And Izuku was standing directly at the point of impact. The silence in the Batcave was a living thing. It was composed of the drip of water from ancient stone, the low hum of a supercomputer processing a world's worth of secrets, and the weight of 3 years of unspoken grief. Izuku Midoriya stood on the pneumatic platform, a ghost made solid, caught in the twin gazes of a god and a devil. To his right, Bruce Wayne. His face, free of the cowl, was a mask of granite. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than Izuku remembered, etched by countless sleepless nights. There was no welcome in his expression, only a hard, assessing stare that was pure Batman. It was the look of a commander evaluating a long-lost weapon, checking it for rust. To his left, a legend brought to life. All Might. In person, he was an impossible mountain of a man. His smile, the one that had been a beacon of hope for Izuku in the darkest days of his childhood, was fixed in place, but his bright blue eyes, usually sparkling with heroic vigor, were wide with a thoughtful, analytical curiosity. He wasn't looking at a tool, he was looking at a person, and seeing every crack, every scar, every ounce of pain Izuku tried to hide. The platform settled into the floor with a soft hiss, the sound like a final judgment. Izuku's feet felt rooted to the spot. He was 15, a trained vigilante who had faced down armed thugs and navigated the treacherous underworld of Bloodhaven. But here, in this cavern of his past, standing before the two men who represented the opposing poles of his entire existence, he felt like a lost 12-year-old boy all over again. Echo! Bruce's voice was low, cutting through the silence. It was a call sign, not a name. A designation. Report to the secondary analysis station. I want a full breakdown of All for One's financial network. Cross-reference with the Falcone family's offshore accounts. Find the link. It was a dismissal. A way to put Izuku back in his box, to re-establish the old hierarchy. You are the analyst. Go analyze. It was familiar, and in a strange way, almost comforting. It was a role he knew how to play. He gave a curt, mechanical nod and was about to move when a voice, warm and resonant as a cello, stopped him. Just a moment, Batman. All Might took a step forward. The sheer size of him was staggering. He didn't just occupy space, he dominated it, a splash of primary color in a world of monochrome shadow. He walked over to Izuku, his footsteps surprisingly light for a man his size. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling over Izuku. But it wasn't an intimidating shadow, it was a warm, comforting shade. You must be the protégé he spoke of, All Might said, his famous smile softening into something more genuine, more personal. He extended a hand the size of a dinner plate. It is an honor to meet you. I am All Might. Izuku stared at the offered hand as if it were a mythical artifact. His own hand, clad in a scarred, dark green gauntlet, trembled as he raised it. He hesitantly placed it in the hero's grasp. All Might's grip was gentle, a stark contrast to his immense power. It was the handshake of a man who knew his own strength down to the last ounce. Izuku, he managed to say, his voice a dry rasp. My name is Izuku Midoriya. He was consciously defying Bruce's use of his codename. A small, pathetic act of rebellion, but it was all he had. Izuku, All Might repeated, his eyes crinkling at the corners. A good, strong name. He looked from Izuku to Bruce, his perceptive gaze missing nothing of the tension between them. Your mentor here speaks very highly of your analytical skills. But forgive me, I see more than just an analyst. I see a young man who carries a heavy burden. Bruce's jaw tightened. He has a job to do. There's no time for sentiment. Sentiment is what separates us from the villains we fight. All Might countered smoothly, his gaze never leaving Izuku. It is the why behind the what, and I believe it is important to understand why this young man looks like he's seen a ghost. Izuku flinched. The hero's perception was unnerving. He could feel his defenses, the cynical walls he had built around himself in Bloodhaven, beginning to crumble under that earnest, compassionate gaze. He pulled his hand back, clenching it into a fist at his side. "With all due respect, All Might," Izuku said, his voice modulator failing to hide his unease. "You don't know anything about me." "Perhaps not," All Might conceded. "But I know that look. I've seen it in the mirror. It's the look of someone who desperately wants to save everyone, and is haunted by the one time they couldn't." The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his breath catching in his throat. It was as if the symbol of peace had reached into his chest and plucked the central, agonizing truth of his existence from his soul. The Joker's laughter echoed in his ears, a phantom cacophony. Bruce stepped forward, his posture protective, proprietary. "That's enough. Izuku, the analysis station." "Now." "No," All Might said, his voice losing its warmth and taking on a quiet, unshakable authority. He put a hand on Izuku's shoulder, a firm, grounding weight. "I would like to speak with him. Alone." Bruce's eyes narrowed. "He is my operative on my mission, and this is our shared war," All Might replied, his tone unwavering. "If we are to work together, we must have trust. Allow me this. Please." The two men locked eyes, a silent battle of wills waged over Izuku's head. One represented order, control, and the grim reality of the fight. The other represented hope, inspiration, and the boundless potential of the human spirit. It felt like an eternity before Bruce finally gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. He turned without another word and strode towards the Batcomputer, his cape sweeping behind him, a curtain of darkness falling between them. All Might guided Izuku away from the main platform, towards the quieter, less trafficked area of the cave where Bruce kept his advanced medical bay. The rhythmic beeping of quiescent heart monitors provided a strange, calming percussion. "Let's have a seat, young Midoriya," All Might said, gesturing to a simple metal bench. He seemed to shrink as he sat, not physically, but in his presence, making himself less intimidating. Izuku remained standing. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive posture he had adopted long ago. "Why?" Izuku asked, the single word loaded with 100 questions. Why him? Why was the number one hero in the world talking to him? What could he possibly want? "Because," All Might began, his voice soft. "When Batman spoke of his lost protégé, I expected to meet a hardened cynic. A soldier forged in his image, and while I do see the soldier, I also see the boy he was, burning beneath the surface. A boy who dreamed of being a hero." "Dreams are for children," Izuku said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I grew up." "Did you?" All Might asked gently. "Or did you just build a taller wall? A hero isn't someone who feels no fear or pain, young man. A hero is someone who feels it all, and stands up anyway. When you appeared on that platform, the first thing you looked at was not your mentor, nor the cave. It was me, and in your eyes I saw the same awe and reverence I see in every child who dreams of making the world a better place. That dream is not dead in you. It is just wounded." Izuku's carefully constructed composure shattered. A tremor ran through him. "You're wrong. That boy is gone. He died in a ballroom 3 years ago. He failed. He hesitated. He got people hurt. He's a liability. That's why I left. I couldn't be the hero he needed. I couldn't even be a hero at all." The confession poured out of him, a torrent of shame and guilt held back for 1,000 lonely nights. He finally looked All Might in the eye, his own green eyes swimming with unshed tears. "You don't understand. I can't be a hero. I'm quirkless," he said the word like a curse. It was the core of his insecurity, the original wound upon which all others had been layered. He expected a reaction of pity, perhaps a polite but dismissive nod. He expected the hero to finally see him for the useless, broken thing he was. Instead, All Might's expression didn't change. He simply nodded, a deep understanding in his eyes. "I see. So that is the root of it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Tell me, young Midoriya, what do you think this is?" He gestured to his own magnificent physique, to the aura of power that surrounded him. "It's your quirk," Izuku said, confused. The source of your power. No, All Might said, the word resonating with profound significance. This is a torch. A sacred flame that has been passed down from one generation to the next, growing stronger with each soul it inhabits. It is a crystallization of power, a quirk meant to fight evil. Its name is One for All. He leaned forward, his blue eyes burning with an incredible intensity. And the hero I inherited it from, the one before me, she was quirkless too. Izuku's mind went blank. The world seemed to tilt, the cave's floor falling away beneath him. Quirkless? The idea was impossible, a paradox that his analytical mind couldn't process. All Might, the ultimate symbol of power, inheriting that power? And I? All Might continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I too was born without a quirk, young man. I was just like you, a boy with a heroic spirit trapped in a powerless body, dreaming of a day I could make a difference. The revelation was a tectonic shift in Izuku's reality. All Might was like him. The foundation of his lifelong sense of inadequacy, the unbridgeable chasm he saw between himself and the heroes he worshipped, vanished in an instant. The power of One for All seeks a worthy vessel. All Might explained. It needs more than just a strong body. It needs a heroic heart. A soul that cries out to save others, even at great personal cost. It needs someone who understands the plight of the powerless because they have lived it. When you confessed your failure to me, you weren't showing me your weakness. You were showing me the depth of your empathy, the immense weight of your conscience. You were showing me that you have the heart of a true hero. He stood up, once again a towering symbol of power, but this time, it was a power Izuku understood. It wasn't just given, it was earned. It was a legacy. Izuku Midoriya, All Might declared, his voice ringing with conviction. I have been searching for a successor. Someone to carry this torch after I am gone. When I look at you, I see a soul of immense courage, a brilliant mind forged in the harshest of crucibles, and a heart that has been broken by its own desire to do good. I see the perfect vessel. He looked Izuku dead in the eye, and made his incredible offer. I want you to inherit my power. I want you to become the next wielder of One for All. For a moment, there was only the sound of Izuku's own frantic heartbeat in his ears. The offer hung in the air, shimmering with impossible promise. Everything he had ever dreamed of, every fantasy he'd had as a child, every desperate prayer he'd whispered into his pillow after a day of being bullied for being quirkless, it was all being handed to him. The power to save people. The power to be a real hero. The power to make his parents proud. A wave of dizzying euphoria washed over him. Yes, a voice screamed in his head. Yes, 1,000 times yes. This is it. This is my chance. And then, another image flooded his mind. The flash of an explosion. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone. The sight of a little girl's teddy bear, its button eyes staring blankly from a pool of blood. The Joker's laughter, echoing, always echoing. You tried to be the hero, and you just made more orphans. The euphoria vanished, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. No, he whispered, the word tasting like poison. He shook his head, backing away. No, you can't. You're wrong about me. I'm not worthy. Your feeling of unworthiness is precisely what makes you worthy. All Might insisted, his expression full of patience. You don't understand. Izuku's voice cracked, rising with desperation. That failure, it wasn't just a mistake. It's who I am. I analyze. I calculate. I hesitate. When a split-second decision was needed, I froze, looking for a third option that wasn't there. A real hero acts. I just think. What if I have your power and I freeze again? The consequences wouldn't be a few injured people. It could be a whole city. I'd be a liability with a nuke inside me. I can't take that risk. He was hyperventilating, the old trauma rising up to choke him. He was a failure. Giving him power wouldn't change that. It would just magnify his capacity to fail. That is not a flaw, my boy. That is a strength you have yet to understand. A new voice, cold and sharp, cut into the conversation. Bruce had approached them, his footsteps utterly silent on the stone floor. His face was a thundercloud of disapproval. He's right about one thing. Bruce said, his gaze fixed on All Might, ignoring Izuku completely. Giving him this unknown power is an unacceptable risk. The ideological clash that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted. The air in the cave grew thick with the pressure of two opposing philosophies colliding. It is not a risk, it is a necessity, All Might countered, turning to face Bruce. The two of them stood in the center of the cave, titans of their respective worlds. All for One is a threat that cannot be defeated by throwing bat-shaped pieces of metal at him. He requires a power of equal or greater magnitude to overcome. And you think an unstable, emotionally compromised teenager is the right person to wield that power? Bruce shot back, his voice dripping with scorn. Look at him. He's still haunted by one bad night. What will happen when this one for all shatters every bone in his body the first time he uses it? What happens when he can't control it and levels a city block? Power is not the answer. Control is the answer. Discipline. Training. He finally turned to Izuku, his expression hard. You don't need this, Izuku. You are already a hero. I trained you myself. You can disable a room full of armed men without taking a single hit. Your mind can process tactical data faster than my own computer. You have the skills. You have the training. You have the gear. This quirk, it's a crutch. A shortcut. And shortcuts get people killed. It was the closest Bruce had ever come to praising him. But it was twisted, used as a weapon in his argument against All Might. He was trying to appeal to the part of Izuku he had created, Echo, the logical, efficient operative. You are selling him short, Bruce, All Might said, his voice a low rumble of disappointment. You trained him to be a soldier in your war. A shadow who fights with fear and technology, but that is not all he is. The world doesn't just need another shadow. It needs a light. It needs a symbol of peace. Something you, with all your admirable work, can never be. You operate from the darkness to punish the guilty. A symbol must stand in the light to inspire the innocent. Your methods save lives, I do not deny it. But they do not save souls. They do not give people hope. Hope doesn't stop a bullet. Bruce snarled, taking a step forward. The Batman was coming out now, the raw fury that fueled him. Hope didn't save my parents in that alley. A plan, the right tool, the will to act. That's what makes a difference. You want to hand him a nuclear warhead and tell him to be a symbol. I want to hand him a scalpel and teach him how to perform surgery. Your way is reckless, and your way is suffocating. All Might boomed, his own frustration finally showing. You are so afraid of him getting hurt, so afraid of him failing again, that you would keep him locked in this cave, forever a ghost, forever your operative. You taught him how to fight, but you never taught him how to forgive himself. This power isn't just a weapon against All for One. It is a chance for him to heal, a chance for him to become the hero he was always meant to be, not the soldier you tried to make him. I tried to keep him safe! Bruce roared, the sound echoing through the vast cavern. It was the cry of a heartbroken father, masked in the rage of a dark night. Safety is a cage! All Might thundered back. They stood there, chest to chest, the darkness and the light, locked in a battle for his soul. And Izuku stood between them, torn apart. Every word Bruce said resonated with the training, the logic, the fear that had been drilled into him. Control. Discipline. Fear is a tool. Do not be reckless. His methods were what had kept Izuku alive in Bloodhaven. Bruce was offering him a return to that brutal, unforgiving, but understandable world. A world of shadows and scalpels. But All Might was offering him everything he had secretly, desperately craved. Not just power, but absolution. A chance to be more than his failure. A chance to inspire, to be a beacon, not just a whisper in the dark. A chance to fill the hollow space in his chest with hope instead of guilt. A world of light and miracles. He looked at Bruce, the man who had saved him from the wreckage of his old life, who had given him a purpose, a home. The man whose disappointment had driven him into exile. He saw a father terrified of losing another child. He looked at All Might, the hero who had inspired him from across the ocean, who had unknowingly been a pillar of his childhood. The man who saw not his failure, but his potential. He saw a mentor offering him not just a future, but a destiny. Two mentors. Two philosophies. Two worlds. And he was standing in the middle, the fulcrum upon which it all balanced. The weight of their legacies, of their hopes and fears, was pressing down on his shoulders. He felt like he was going to be crushed. Alfred's quiet voice suddenly cut through the tension, seemingly from nowhere. He had approached with his usual supernatural stealth, holding a silver tray with a single glass of water. Perhaps, he said, his calm British accent a stark contrast to the booming argument, the young master should be allowed a moment to breathe before he makes a decision that will define the rest of his life. He offered the glass of water to Izuku. Their eyes met. In Alfred's gaze, Izuku saw no judgment, no expectation. Only quiet, unwavering support. Izuku took the glass, his hand shaking. The argument between Bruce and All Might died down, the two men backing away from each other, their chests still heaving. The choice had been laid bare. It was no longer their decision to make. It was his. He could accept Bruce's path. Remain Echo. A creature of the night, a brilliant tactician, forever chained to his past, but safe in the world he knew. Or he could accept All Might's path. Embrace the power of one for all. Become Deku, a true hero of light, risking self-destruction and catastrophic failure for the chance to become a symbol of hope. The ghost of Crime Alley or the symbol of peace. The scalpel or the torch. The shadow or the sun. He looked down at his reflection in the glass of water. A pale, terrified face stared back at him, a boy caught between two impossible worlds. The weight of the choice was immense, terrifying, and entirely his own. The echoes of the confrontation faded, leaving a silence in the Batcave that was heavier and more suffocating than any stone. Bruce and All Might stood like opposing monoliths, the raw energy of their argument still crackling in the air between them. They were two immovable objects, two fundamental forces of justice, and Izuku Midoriya was the impossible point of collision. He stood trembling, the glass of water in his hand shaking so violently that ripples disturbed his pale, terrified reflection. He felt like a child again, caught between two warring parents. One offered a world of harsh, unforgiving safety, a cage built of logic and discipline. The other offered a world of boundless, terrifying freedom, a sky where he could soar or be consumed by the sun. Both paths were paved with pain, one with the slow erosion of his own soul, the other with the explosive agony of self-destruction. Alfred, the quiet diplomat who had navigated the Wayne family's emotional minefields for decades, stepped gracefully into the void. He placed a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder, a touch that was both grounding and a silent offer of sanctuary. "Come, Master Izuku," he said, his voice the epitome of calm in the storm. "A change of scenery is often conducive to clarity. I believe a pot of tea is in order." He didn't wait for a response from the two titans. He simply guided Izuku away from the central platform, leading him toward a small, private study carved into the rock face of the cave, just off the main medical bay. It was a place Izuku remembered well. It was Bruce's sanctuary within the sanctuary, a small room with a worn leather armchair, a desk cluttered with cold case files, and floor-to-ceiling shelves filled not with tactical manuals, but with history, philosophy, and classic literature. It smelled of old paper, leather, and Alfred's Earl Grey tea. It was the one place in the cave that felt more like Bruce Wayne than Batman. Alfred settled Izuku into the armchair, which seemed to swallow his slight frame. He then moved to a small, built-in kitchenette and began the familiar, soothing ritual of preparing tea. The quiet clink of the porcelain cup, the whistle of the kettle, the fragrant steam that soon filled the small room. It was a symphony of normalcy in a place that was anything but. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Alfred allowed the silence to perform its work, to let the adrenaline recede from Izuku's veins. He placed a steaming cup of tea on the small table beside Izuku, along with a plate of shortbread biscuits, the same kind he used to make for Izuku after a particularly grueling training session. A taste of a past that felt a lifetime away. Izuku stared into the amber liquid of the tea, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. He felt the immense pressure of the choice, but beneath it, a deeper, more painful ache. The source of it was the look on Bruce's face. It wasn't just anger or disapproval. It was a raw, visceral fury that Izuku had only ever seen him direct at his most hated enemies. And it had been directed at All Might, all because of him. "He hates me," Izuku whispered, the words barely audible over the hum of the cave. I ran away, and now I've come back and brought this. I've brought his opposite into his home and let him challenge everything he is. He must hate me. Alfred, who was polishing a pair of glasses with a soft cloth, paused. He turned, his expression one of profound gentleness. Oh, my dear boy, he sighed, a world of sadness in the simple phrase. You mistake the nature of the beast entirely. Master Bruce is capable of many things. He is capable of great anger, of profound sorrow, of a grim and terrible resolve, but he is utterly incapable of hating you. But you saw him, Izuku insisted, his voice cracking. He looked at me like I was a broken tool he didn't know how to fix. No, Alfred corrected softly, sitting down in the simple wooden chair opposite Izuku. He looked at you as a father looks at a son who is standing on the edge of a cliff. What you perceive as anger is, in fact, terror. A terror so profound it can only express itself as rage. Izuku looked up, confused. Terror? Batman isn't afraid of anything. A sad smile touched Alfred's lips. A common misconception. He is afraid of many things. He is afraid of bats, of clowns, of crowbars. But most of all, Master Bruce is afraid of failing his family. It is the one fear that has governed his entire life. He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. May I tell you a secret, Master Izuku? Something I have never spoken of to him, or to Master Dick? Izuku nodded, captivated. The week after you left, Alfred began, his eyes looking back into the past, was one of the darkest I have ever witnessed in this house. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He spent 132 consecutive hours in this cave. He rewatched the security footage from that gala thousands of times. Not to analyze the Joker's tactics. Not to assess your performance, but to find his own mistake. Alfred's words painted a picture in Izuku's mind. Bruce, alone in the darkness, torturing himself with a constant replay of his perceived failure. He zoomed in on the moment you hesitated. Alfred continued. And he didn't see a failure to act. He saw a child, his child, being forced to make an impossible choice that no one, let alone a boy of 12, should ever have to face. He blamed himself. For bringing you into his world, for putting you in the field too soon. For not being fast enough to intercept the Joker before he could lay his psychological poison on you. Your note, the one that said you were a liability, it did not confirm his assessment of you. It confirmed his greatest fear, that his war had broken you, just as it had broken him. Tears began to well in Izuku's eyes, hot and shameful. For 3 years, he had carried the narrative of Bruce's disappointment. It had been the foundation of his exile, the fuel for his self-flagellation. To hear that it had all been a lie, a tragic misinterpretation of a father's silent grief, was devastating. When he discovered you were gone, Alfred's voice was barely a whisper. He did not rage. He simply broke. He sealed off your room. He ordered Master Dick and myself never to speak your name. He became colder, more distant, even than before. He threw himself into his work with a self-destructive fury that nearly killed him on 3 separate occasions. Your running away did not prove you were a failure, Master Izuku. It was the single greatest failure of his life. He drove away his son. Alfred let the truth settle in the quiet room. The man you see out there, arguing so vehemently against All Might, is not the Batman trying to control his operative. He is Bruce Wayne, a terrified father, trying desperately to put the son he thought he'd lost forever back into a box where he believes he can keep him safe. He sees this power, this one for all, as a loaded gun you are pressing to your own head, and he is trying to wrestle it from your hands in the only way he knows how, with anger, logic, and control. Izuku finally understood. The rage wasn't disappointment in him. It was a desperate, clumsy, and profoundly painful expression of love. Bruce wasn't trying to keep him from becoming a hero. He was trying to keep him from dying. Alfred reached across and patted Izuku's hand. All Might sees your potential. Master Bruce sees your fragility. Both are looking at the same boy, but through very different lenses. Neither of them is entirely right, and neither is entirely wrong. The only person who can decide which lens shows the truer picture is you. He stood up, his duty done. You are not defined by Master Bruce's fears, nor by All Might's hopes. You are defined by the choices you make for yourself. Now, finish your tea. It's getting cold. Alfred left the study, leaving Izuku alone with the monumental weight of this new understanding. He wasn't just choosing a power source. He was choosing what kind of man he wanted to be. He was choosing which fear to embrace, the fear of failure, or the fear of never reaching his full potential. He finished his tea, the warmth spreading through his chest, fortifying him. He stood up and walked out of the study, not back towards the main platform, but deeper into the cave. He needed to see something. He walked past the roaring waterfall that fed the cave's subterranean river, past the platforms holding the Batmobile and the Batwing, until he reached the far wall. There, illuminated by solemn, respectful spotlights, were the memorial cases. He stopped first in front of the one containing Dick's original Robin costume. The bright reds and greens were a stark contrast to the cave's gloom. It represented a legacy, a partnership, a success. Dick had graduated from this role, had grown beyond it to become his own man, his own hero. It was a story of triumph. Then, his eyes drifted to the case beside it. It was empty. The glass was pristine, the internal lighting casting a sterile, lonely glow on the vacant stand within. A small, brass plaque was affixed to the base. It was engraved with a single word: Echo. This was his legacy. A void. An absence. A story of failure. He pressed his hand against the cool glass, his reflection staring back at him. A ghost in an empty shrine. This was Bruce's path for him. A life as Echo, the silent partner, the shadow's shadow. It was a path of skill, discipline, and purpose. But it was also a path defined entirely by Batman, a role in someone else's story. And he had already failed at it once. Could he truly go back to being that person, knowing what he knew now? Could he live forever in the shadow, haunted by the potential of what he could have been? He closed his eyes and let the memory he had suppressed for so long play out in his mind, not as a nightmare, but as a piece of tactical footage to be analyzed. The gala. The Joker's laughter. The impossible choice. A or B? Tick-tock, little bird! His younger self had frozen. Or had he? He re-examined the memory with the cold, detached eye of the analyst Bruce had trained him to be. He hadn't frozen. His mind had been racing, processing variables at an impossible speed. Gordon, civic stability key ally. Family, innocent civilians, the core of the mission's ethos. It wasn't a paralysis of fear, it was a paralysis of empathy. He was trying to solve an unsolvable equation. He was trying to find the third option, the one where no one had to get hurt. His failure wasn't that he was weak. His failure was that he cared too much. His instinct wasn't to cut the Gordian knot, but to painstakingly try to untie it in the fraction of a second he had. The Joker hadn't defeated a soldier that night. He had defeated a boy who refused to accept that someone had to lose. And that instinct, that desperate, all-consuming need to save everyone, that wasn't a liability. That wasn't a flaw in his programming. That was the entire point. That was the heart of a hero. All Might was right. Bruce had trained him to be a weapon, a perfect soldier. He had given him the skills, the tactics, the mindset of a warrior. He had forged a scalpel. But a scalpel is just a tool. It has no will of its own. It cannot decide which life to save. His heart, the one that had broken in that ballroom, was the will. And what All Might was offering was not a replacement for his training. It was an amplification. Bruce had given him the control. All Might was offering him the power. He didn't have to choose one over the other. He could synthesize them. He could become something new. He could use the rigid discipline and analytical fury that Bruce had beaten into him to control the boundless, chaotic power of One for All. He could be the hero who possessed the power of a god and the mind of a detective. He wouldn't be the next Batman. He wouldn't be the next All Might. He would be the first of his kind. The decision settled into his bones, not as a euphoric rush, but as a cold, solid certainty. It was terrifying. He would likely fail 100 more times. He would break himself on this power, but it was a path forward. The path of Echo was a path into the past, into a role he had already outgrown. This new path was a leap into the unknown, but it was his. He took his hand off the glass of his own empty memorial. He turned his back on the ghost of Echo and walked back towards the main platform, his footsteps steady and sure. Bruce and All Might were still there, standing in a tense silence. They both turned as he approached. They saw the change in him immediately. The terrified, cornered boy was gone. In his place stood a young man who had accepted the weight on his shoulders. He stopped before them, meeting both their gazes. First, he looked at Bruce. "Bruce," he said, using his name for the first time in 3 years. The single word was filled with a torrent of emotion. "Thank you? For everything. You saved my life. You gave me a home. You trained me to be strong, to be smart, to survive. You taught me how to be a soldier. I will never forget that, and I will use every lesson you taught me." He took a breath. "But I can't be your soldier anymore. I can't live in the shadows, defined by my fears and my failures. I have to be something more." Then, he turned to All Might. The hero's blue eyes were full of a nervous, hopeful energy. "All Might," Izuku said, his voice clear and strong. "I accept your offer. I will inherit One for All." He bowed his head respectfully. "Not because I believe I am worthy. I'm not. I'm still the same quirkless, useless Deku I've always been on the inside. But I have to try. The world needs a hero who can save people with a smile, and I want to be that hero more than anything. If there is even a chance this power can help me do that, I have to take it. That is my choice." The silence that followed was different. It was a silence of acceptance, of a momentous decision made. All Might's smile returned, brighter than ever before, a true sunrise in the dark cave. Relief and a profound, fatherly pride washed over his features. "Well said, my boy," he boomed, his voice full of emotion. "Well said. You have made a brave choice, and I promise you, you will not regret it." Izuku then looked back at Bruce. The granite mask was back in place, but Izuku could now see the cracks. He saw the flicker of deep, profound hurt in his eyes, the fear of a father watching his son choose a path that would lead him directly into harm's way. Bruce didn't say a word. He simply gave a single, sharp nod, turned on his heel, and walked over to the medical bay. He began activating monitors, pulling out diagnostic equipment. If he couldn't stop this, then he would do the only other thing he could. He would control the variables. He would prepare for the fallout. It was the only way he knew how to care. All Might led Izuku to the medical bay, where Bruce was now running a baseline medical scan on a large monitor. "Now about the transfer," All Might said, looking slightly sheepish. "One for All is passed on by the recipient ingesting the current holder's DNA. A blood transfusion would work, but that's a bit dramatic. There is a much simpler, if more, traditional method." He reached up and plucked a single strand of his golden, V-shaped hair. He held it out to Izuku, who stared at it, utterly bewildered. "Eh?" was all Izuku could manage. All Might's booming laugh echoed through the cave. "Yes, I know it seems a bit undignified. But this is it. The sacred torch, the culmination of 8 generations of power, a beacon of hope for all mankind." He thrust the hair towards Izuku, a wide, almost manic grin on his face. "Now, eat this." Izuku looked at the single strand of hair in All Might's hand. He looked at the bank of advanced medical scanners Bruce was calibrating to measure esoteric energy signatures. He looked at the grim, disapproving face of his mentor, who looked like he was preparing for a bomb to go off. Swallowing hard, he took the hair. It felt like a normal hair. He put it in his mouth. It tasted like nothing. He swallowed. For a second, nothing happened. He felt a wave of anticlimax. Had it worked? Then, the world exploded. It wasn't a sound or a light. It was a feeling. A fire ignited in his stomach and instantly consumed his entire body. It was a raging, uncontrolled inferno of pure power. His vision went white. He could feel the energy surging through his veins, a tidal wave of force that his body was completely unprepared for. Images, feelings, and sounds flooded his mind. He saw a muscular woman with a kind smile, her knuckles bloody as she faced a towering monster. He saw a thin man in a dark suit, coughing up blood but with eyes of burning resolve. He saw 6 other figures, silhouettes of power, their lives, their struggles, their hopes and fears all crashing into him at once. He heard their voices, a chorus of whispers and shouts, all centered on one singular purpose: you must defeat him. You must save them. The power was a storm, a hurricane raging inside his very cells. It was too much. It felt like his bones were humming, like his skin was about to tear apart. On Bruce's monitor, a dozen alarms blared at once. Bioenergy readings went off the chart, a chaotic, jagged scrawl of red light. The torrent of sensations subsided, leaving him gasping on his knees on the cold floor. The power was still there, but it wasn't a hurricane anymore. It was a furnace, a roaring, white-hot star of energy settled in the core of his being. He could feel it, humming under his skin, a universe of power waiting to be unleashed. He slowly got to his feet, his body trembling. He felt different. Stronger. He looked at his hands. They seemed the same, but he could feel the immense, terrifying potential coiled within them. He needed to know it was real. He clenched his right fist. It was not a conscious decision to use the power. It was just an instinct, a desire to feel it, to confirm its existence. He didn't focus it. He didn't control it. He just squeezed. A sickening crack echoed through the medical bay, a sound like a dry branch being snapped in half, amplified 100 times. An explosion of searing, unimaginable pain shot up his arm. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. He looked down. His right arm, from the elbow down, was a mangled ruin. The bones in his forearm had shattered, bursting outward. His gauntlet was twisted and buckled, unable to contain the force. Blood, thick and dark, began to seep through the cracks in the armor. The limb hung at an unnatural angle, purple and swollen, a grotesque testament to the untamed power now residing within him. He collapsed, clutching the ruined limb, his vision swimming with black spots. Through the haze of pain, he saw two figures rushing towards him. All Might, his face a mask of concern and pride. And Bruce, his expression grim, his worst fears immediately and catastrophically confirmed. He was already barking orders into his comms. Alfred! Prep the surgical suite! Multiple compound fractures, severe tissue damage. Code Trauma 1. Izuku lay on the floor of the Batcave, the taste of blood in his mouth, the fire of a new power in his soul, and his first broken bone as its price. The weight of his choice had become a physical, agonizing reality. He had his power. Now, the real pain was about to begin.